So thank you very much for those who've made the effort to come in person. It's great to have an in-person meeting, but also thank you for so many people attending online. That's great as well. So we hope you are settled, ready for a really interesting talk. This has been a very popular topic, threat modeling. And what we're going to be doing this evening is understanding a little bit about threat modeling and how it fits in with the rest of the DevSecOps world. Also our colleagues from Iris Risk will be demonstrating threat modeling using some of their tooling, and they'll explain how, if you want to go and try that, how you can go and do that yourselves using a community edition of their product. So this is a great opportunity for you to learn about the topic using this product as an example. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Julian, who's going to introduce the thing, and then I'll know who's going to follow on later. If you have any questions during the meeting, please enter them on the chat. As I've said earlier, I'll keep an eye on those, and I'll raise those with Julian and Arno at a later point. If it's really urgent, if it looks like it's urgent, I'll interrupt. Later on, if you would like to ask a question verbally with the speaker, well, I can arrange to unmute you. So let me know if you want to do that towards the end. Okay, so thank you, Julian. Thank you, Arno, for coming here in person.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Good evening. Thanks very much indeed. So what I'm going to do is just share it on my screen. Thanks very much, Steve, for the invitation here. I think probably the best thing to do would be just to start off with who Iris Risk is, and just to give you a bit of a sense of why we're qualified to talk about this. So Iris Risk is an organization which is really dedicated to designing threat modeling so that you can get secure systems quickly and easily designed and threat modeled at scale. And our vision is very much about making sure that that happens. We want to remain the first company in the marketplace, or the top company in the marketplace. And we want our products to basically always be at the cutting edge. And for that reason, we have a network of partners. We also have deep engagement with customers and the feedback systems that we have there. And we also have a community version. And we're particularly interested in getting more and more people to use that community version, which is free, because it allows people to experiment in their own way. So if we start with a very fundamental question, and I appreciate that different people will have a different interpretation. And we do have people here right now, Irene, who happens to have been one of the people who wrote the Threat Modeling Manifesto, all have a different understanding of what threat modeling actually is. But you can break it down very simply. It's all about anticipating a problem, identifying what that problem means, qualifying it, and then working out what the issues are going to be so you can mitigate those threats or risks. And that could be to any project or product, it could be an application. This whole ethos has become known as starting left. You know, the benefit of Iris Risk is quite simple. We can simplify a very complex process. We can help build security champions within dev teams, for example, because the idea is for people who are doing the design work, people who are actually doing the development work, to have the capacity to measure twice and cut once. And that is so that they can make sure the design is actually phased and rolled out intelligently and efficiently, and taking the risks out as they go along. Another benefit about what we do is we're quite lucky in that because we actually have Draw.io, which is deeply embedded with the tool, you don't have to know much about threat modeling, but you do still have to design something. It always comes with the point of view that you have an idea, you put it down, you draw a few boxes, you put lines in between, and in no time at all, you've actually got the design of something which is going to mean something to someone. It's going to process data, it's going to consume things. And in that journey of just setting that out, by default, you're building a threat model. But also what you're doing, as you land up building hundreds of these things within an organization, we have some customers that have about 1,000, 5,000 in one case, if I remember rightly. This becomes an invaluable single source of truth, because threat models are living things. There's always a new threat. There's always something else which is going to go on. And to do that manually, to try and keep across all of those applications which are in flight at any given time. And we saw this recently with Log4j, where a new realization comes out, a new threat that's been around for a while. You now suddenly need to take that through all of your applications and check well, this is where that single source of truth becomes so valuable. So ultimately, you want to collaborate, you need to talk to stakeholders, and all of those sorts of interest groups need to have visibility, and you have that ability with automation. Now, if we talk about the software development lifecycle, that's probably where we have most of our strength is in the application side of things. We have other solutions, but if you concentrate on that, that's probably the best known. Now, we talked about design, develop, and test in the context of the earlier slide. But at each of those steps, in order for you to threat model, you're only asking 4 fundamental questions, and they're deliberately non-technical. If you think about it, what are you building? What can go wrong? And then what are you actually going to do about it? And did you do a good job? And now these principles have been expressed by people like Adam Shostak for a long time. There's the Threat Modeling Manifesto, which embodies these. And we have people like Irene and then Stephen DeFries, who's our CEO, Fraser Scott, who's our VP of Product, are also signatories on that. And people like Adam Shostak as well. And over the last decade or so, this has become a progressive realization. It's the whole process, but it goes beyond the design, the development, the test. You've also got the deploying, and then you've got to operate it. And that's why this becomes a continuous cycle. And more than 95% of the threat models that our customers do live on for year after year for those reasons. Now, we do have examples of how this process gives you greater efficiency through automation, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about that at all at the moment, because I want Anu to actually take what I've just said and give it to you in a better way so that you can actually understand what it looks like. Because threat modeling is a process like anything else. You have a beginning, a middle, and the end, and you want to be able to measure and see the outcome at the end of that time. And so one of the things you need is the ability to audit. So as Anu takes you through the various steps and builds a threat model, shows you how it populates, and then doesn't just give you the threats, but actually gives you that life cycle of how they're dealt with and how those are mitigated, how you push things over to an incident tracker like Jira, for example, and how those are resolved and then brought back in. It gives you that complete life cycle, because ultimately you need to know that you've got everything resolved and tucked away, so that if you get a knock on the door, you can answer the question, where did something go wrong and what have you done to fix it? So with that, I'm going to pass over to Anu. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Julian. Do you guys have any questions before I go on and start with the demonstration at all? No questions? Okay, great. Is there any question on the chat?
Not on the chat, sorry.
Not on the chat so far? Okay, great. So what I'll do now, I'll show you guys a quick demonstration of Erase Risk and how you use it. And in fact, you can go and get the community edition and use it from there as well. So in the community edition, it is almost a full feature of the product. So every component, every threat that we have within our libraries are actually there, and you can use them for free. The only thing that you don't get is the customization part. So if you want to customize your own component, if you want to get in your own libraries and all this good content that you want to probably use, well, you cannot do that in the community edition, and probably you need to talk to us and we can arrange that. So community edition is there for you to go ahead and create your own things, generate some templates if you want everybody else to use those templates as well, so everybody can see what you guys are doing. So that's also possible within the tool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into Erase Risk, and while my session has expired, and typically this is my own instance. As you log in, you'll see the different project that you're working on. In your community edition, you can only work on one project because this is a limited edition. So you can only work on one project, but nothing stops you from deleting the content of that and see the different threat model that you can create within the tool. Okay. So here, normally this is how we license the product. So you'll see the number of projects you can create. This will be normally how many licenses you get. In the real edition, you can also get different users logging in with different personas, different profiles, and different permissions. So we have a very granular role-based access where you can define different roles and permissions to those projects. So what I'm going to do is to create a brand new project, and this is exactly the same process in the community edition. Okay, so here you will have to put some names just to define which project you're working on, and then again you need to capture some metadata. In the community edition, you cannot customize this, but on the real one, you can actually customize to have more field if you wanted to capture more data, or if you had to have some kind of classification with some pre-filled information. So all of this is customizable in the real edition. Then you can also start with the security questionnaire. Community edition will not have that, so we'll go straight to the creation of the project. Okay, so I'm starting the project, is building up, and what you will notice is that you'll see Joe.io. So Joe.io is a very popular join tool that a lot of people have been using for a long time, and we know that a lot of our customers, a lot of our prospects, actually been using Joe.io before, but they can also import from other sources of diagramming tools. So if you have visuals, if you have other platforms, you can also import to erase risk by copy and pasting. On the left-hand side here, we have the panels, which are every tool that we can use within erase risk, all the components, and what we call components, they are just basically pictures. And behind those pictures, we already done the threat model for you. So in fact, you just need to drag and drop them on your screen, and you'll have some of the threats and countermeasures that are relevant to those different components. So you don't need to be, for example, an expert in AWS to be able to grab a S3 bucket and see the security requirement behind an S3 bucket, for example. Okay, so this is what we're building into the tool. Yeah.
Just a quick one. You've got accounts there. If one of your risks was spending too much, can you pick that up?
Which one?
Can you repeat the question on that?
You've got accounts there. So AWS account environment.
Yeah.
Can that pick up overspend?
No. So what it will be, it will have a look at your environment within AWS, and it will provide you some requirements around what you're doing with accounts. What can you do in terms of AIM and all this kind of security around erase risk? But you will not see overspend that you're actually doing with the tool because we're not connected to your platform, right?
So if you're a sub account, that's a bigger risk. Okay, thank you.
No problem. So I can do different things. So I will start drawing a very simple threat model. And the first thing that you need to use is what we call trust zones. Trust zones can be seen as network. So they're just placeholder within which you're going to drop your different components. Okay, so you can customize that as well. So in my specific case, I'm going to use an internet trust zone, which have a trace rating behind it as well. So we'll use that for the risk calculation of this application to let you know, hey, this application has a certain weight, and you'll be able to see how critical this application is or not. The next thing, I'm going to add another trust zone, which will be a public trust zone. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because I'm going to have more component inside of it. And then I'm going to be able to use some of the components which are here on the left-hand side. I can also search for those components, or I can just go through the list. Component, again, we can customize those, not in the community edition. In the community edition, you get everything out of the box, cannot customize it for now. So I'm going to pick up the components. And once again, it is just a shape, but those shapes has weaknesses and countermeasure behind them. And I'm going to be able to draw them and add more component as I'm going through this. So I'm just going to go through it so you can see the number of components that we have. So the challenge is for us to be able to follow what AWS is doing, for example. So as you know, those guys, that will provide you with new component, new service on a monthly basis almost. So we're trying to catch up, right? So we're trying to catch up, and we're listening to customers who say, well, you know, these are components that we'd like to have in a tool, and we're trying to have that. So on a monthly basis, we're also trying to catch up and add new things into our tool. So as you can see here, there's a lot of components, a lot of services that we already threat model for your users, and then you can add them into my threat model here. So I said I'm going to use the S3 bucket, so probably I'm going to go down a bit quicker. But as you can see, there's a lot of components, and you could have just searched through it. So I'm going to use my S3 bucket. And an S3 bucket is just a simple storage in the cloud, but it can also be used as a web server for a static website. Okay, so I'm going to use that. Then I'm going to use probably a database somewhere. And I'm going to have a Lambda function to make something more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to pick up a Lambda function. Okay, and then I'm going to define the links between all these components. And I can even describe what those links are. Right, so I'm going to be able to right click and then edit the data flow. And for example, say, well, you know, I'm processing some credit card data, or I'm doing different things with some data, and I can define those ones, but I also have the ability to put some protocols here if I wanted to. So let me go and put HTTPS, for example. Okay, so if we come back to Julian's presentation, he was talking about the 4 fundamental questions of threat modeling. You know, what are we building? So right here, we have described to Iris Risk what we're actually building, right? The next step, Iris Risk will generate the threats for you automatically. So what I'm going to do here is to press on update the model. For people that have been doing threat modeling manually, they will know that this is a very tedious task. So if I had to do it manually, probably I would have to know about web UI, and probably I would have an Excel sheet with a lot of threats, and then I will copy and paste into a specific document, which takes a lot of time, right? So here we've done the work for you ahead of time, and typically all you need to do is to click on update the model, which will generate all these threats, and you will be able to demonstrate what those threats are. So now the model is updated, and in fact, I can go and see the threats. So now we go into the second question: what could go wrong, right? So now with Iris Risk, it's providing you everything that could go wrong with those different components. Okay, so this is the idea behind it. You draw the diagram with the different components. We provide you with the threats related to all of these components. We can drill down and extend those different components to see what they have. For example, on the web UI, I got 9. On the S3 buckets, I got 3, and so on. But before we drill down and see what they are, actually, I just want to show you the power of using the questionnaire. So a lot of people, when they're doing a threat model, they will have discussion with different teams. They would have different workshops. They would ask different questions to the teams to make sure that they capture enough information about the threat model. Well, here we have the ability to do the same. So I could, for example, right-click on the web UI and complete a questionnaire. Right. So here the questionnaire, we provide you with a questionnaire out of the box with some questions, but this can be customized to your need, right? So if you have further questions that you want to ask, you can ask those questions. So what can I do with those questions? Well, I'm going to answer some and see what happens. So for example, I'm saying, well, I'm storing critical data or I'm processing critical data. As you've noticed, a new tab has come up, and now you can answer more follow-up questions around, what you're storing with those critical data. Okay. As now PCI DSS, say somebody send in the room. Now PCI DSS is coming into the picture.
Can you repeat any questions?
Yeah, sure, I will repeat the question, yes. So yeah, so somebody just noticed that in fact, by doing so, well, I should be compliant to PCI DSS. And in fact, this is what the tool automatically does for you in the background, and you will see that. I got more questions, so I can even go to the authentication. And here, I've been asked, how do you handle authentication? And I will have follow-up questions upon answering those questions, and so on. So you can go to the data transport. We can see different other questions. What are the language that you're using? And this will bring more threats and different security requirements for your applications. So now we know a little bit more about your application. Okay, so I'm going to click on done. And what I'm going to do next is to click update again. So this thing will be updated. Okay, so I'm going to wait for a few seconds and wait until it's updated. So there's few ways to get a diagram in. You can draw it. You can import it from another source. You can even use CloudFormation or Terraforms. You can use, yes, don't be surprised. We can even describe your infrastructure within a text file. So for example, the developer comes in, within his ID is going to describe to Iris Risk, well, this is what I'm building. And then I can send it to Iris Risk, which will draw the diagram automatically for you. And then will generate the threat for you as well. So different ways to get into the diagramming. And some of our customers don't even want to jump into the Iris Risk platform. They just want to use API stuff. So they can actually use their infrastructure as a code, send it to Iris Risk without even logging into the application, and then generating the threats and probably taking the threats to use it in a different tool. So we have a lot of scenarios like that we can manage within Iris Risk. Okay, so I've updated my model. And as you remember earlier, we had 9 threats. As a result of answering questions, we now have 21 threats. Okay. If I go down the list, that's a lot of threats, right? If I go down the list, you will see that in fact, the reason for that is that we have answered questions around authentication. So now I've got some requirement regarding authentication, what you should do to make sure that your credentials are secured. I've also got things that are relevant to, there you go, PCI DSS, right? Because we're now saying that we're processing critical data, we need to do some things around PCI DSS. And we can check those requirements if you want it. So the way we do it, we have a taxonomy behind it. So for every threat, we have weaknesses, and beyond those weaknesses, we also have countermeasures, things that you need to do to make sure that this weakness has been implemented. And here are some of them, okay? I'm gonna pick up the one that I like quite a bit. The cross-site scripting, the infamous cross-site scripting, right? So what is it? So Iris Risk will describe what is it. We'll provide you with some information, some external links as well, for you to learn. And in fact, you can even communicate with the rest of the business. So who are the people that are supposed to go and fix those cross-site scripting when we find them? Well, the developers. Where do the developers actually work? Well, they like to work within their bug tracking systems. So what we're going to do here, well, let's go ahead and send it as a ticket so the developer can have a look at it and go and fix it. Okay, so we have a bi-directional connection with Jira or any bug tracking system that we support. You get a ticket number and you can actually go ahead and log in and see the information that we have within this. So obviously will be the same information that we've seen within Iris Risk, but on top of that, you get also some external sources. You also get some example, Secure Code Warrior videos that will give you some kind of teaser around cross-site scripting, what is it, and how you can actually reflect that and how you can fix it. Once, as a developer, you went in, you fix it, you will document it within Jira, and then you will close the ticket, right? So you've now done the work. So what would happen is that in the background, this will also close the ticket within Iris Risk, right? So we can see the information being populated as well within Iris Risk, and we'll be able to see this.
Can I ask a question
Sure, go ahead.
about this cross-site scripting?
Yes.
Can it inspect the code on the website, or is it just a verbal process?
Okay. So the question is, can Iris Risk inspect the code or verify the cross-site scripting, for example? So you have to bear in mind that probably whenever you use Iris Risk, it will probably before the application is even developed, right? So it's it's in design stage, right? You can even use it afterwards, but in fact, we don't check the application itself. We can leverage source code analyzer if you want it. So for example, if you use Fortify, we can use those results in Fortify to actually validate that the developers actually done the work that they're supposed to do, right? So if I say that I fixed the cross-site scripting, if I scan my code with Fortify, Fortify will find the cross-site scripting. It will come back to me and say, hey, you said that you fixed it, but in fact, I've seen it. You will reopen the ticket within Iris Risk, reopen the ticket within Jira as well. Okay.
And my question is, normally it's a standard practice to use source code analyzers anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
And if cross-site scripting is possible, it is going to raise the issue.
Yeah.
How does this product benefits on top of the source code analyzers?
Okay, so as you know, so the question is, how does the tool benefit on top of source code analyzers, right? So whenever you start doing threat modeling with Iris Risk or within any other tool, you will find those security requirements even before you drop a line of code, right? So you can tell the developers, which will work with their security requirements or their functional requirements, hey, you need to implement a cross-site scripting mechanism. If they did that correctly, whenever you scan the source code, you should not find this cross-site scripting. So this is how we validate. This is how Iris Risk actually comes in and adds things on the top of that. We have some of our partners that did actually a test to convince the developer that doing threat modeling is actually a good idea. What they did is to take 2 mobile applications, scan the code, do some testing around them. They find some threats and vulnerabilities. And then what they did is to actually do the threat modeling with Iris Risk out of the box. So they found 65% of those vulnerabilities that they find in the pen testing and in source code analysis. And when they customize Iris Risk, I think they find 85% of those things. So as you can see, you could have found those vulnerabilities much earlier in the life cycle if you actually did threat modeling, not just wait until the end, somebody reports to you that you have a cross-site scripting or somebody actually exploits it, and then you have to go back and you have to fix it. Okay? Yes?
So you introduced Lambda functions.
Yep.
So assuming that you had something before and that was the only change, what benefit can we do with your tool? So what was the change of introducing Lambda functions to our risk matrix? So what was the effect of it?
Okay, so the effect of that is that it's going to, so what's the effect? Sorry, I have to repeat the question. So the question was, I've introduced a Lambda function within my threat model. What is the effect of adding that? And what can it do? So in fact, I've added that just to make it a bit more fun for my threat model. So what it will do, it will bring more security requirements for that Lambda functions. Okay, so whatever you bring in there, so I'll show you my diagram here.
So if you were an architect, you can test stuff.
You can test stuff even before it actually dropped in.
Really, really good.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for architects, that's actually the tool for architects and see the security value of things that you're going to be building. So I know that I'm going to be building an application. This is what the application looks like. Ahead of time, I know what are the threats, I know what are the risks, and I can almost make sure that I've got those security requirements for the developers to make sure that they implement those as they're building the application, not just the functional requirements, but also the security requirements. Okay. So we've seen the power of the questionnaire. So the questionnaire did ask some more threat, did ask, add some more threat to my threat model to make sure that we are more in line with what the application looked like. Okay, we can also have a look at different dashboard and different reporting that we can build within the tool. But I think today that's a little bit too much. But in fact, within risk, we have an analytics module that allows you to create, your own customized dashboard. You can query anything within risk and find, have a lot of insight into risk. So what I will do, I will also show you that in fact, you can have a view to actually focus on a particular compliance. So we mentioned PCI DSS. In fact, what you could do is to go back and say, well, I'm going to filter and only see the things that are relevant to PCI DSS, for example. So this helps you to focus on a specific compliance, but also you can do a lot of filtering here to actually have the thing that you're really interested in. So yeah.
Notice you've got the CIS benchmarks up to 2. Do you have any of the STIG profiles level 3?
No, but
why not?
Well, okay, so the question was around different standards that we have. So we have a team that actually specializes in building those standards and even adding some of the components to our threat model. So we have to start somewhere, right? So this list that you see here is ever evolving. And in fact, this list can be customized. So in fact, as a customer, you can add your own list if you wanted. So you can add something that is more relevant to you.
You
So
don't routinely do the level 3 government level profile?
No, right now, no.
Okay.
But in fact, people can build it. Our partner network can build it. And for example, we have things I was doing a presentation for the German guys. And in fact, they were thinking of building their own German standard, which is relevant to them in Germany. And as we in the UK, we don't actually care, right? So the flexibility is there in the tool for you to be able to build any of the other standard that we don't cover from outside of the tool right here.
But you've got NIST 853, so that's fine.
Yeah. So some of them are overlapping, obviously, right? So some of them are overlapping. So we're going to bring in the ISO 2701. Well, inside of that, a lot of it will also be covered by some of the standard that we have here. So again, if we don't have on a specific standard, sometime, some of the one that we're already using will actually overlap with those, and you can actually leverage those ones in order to see what are the compliance. Okay, so you can do some filtering around those ones, and you can have different views, and then you can generate different reports. You can also take a threat model and actually reuse it elsewhere if you want it. So I have my threat model here, and let's say that this threat model actually represented my login system, right? So I could actually come into risk and say, well, this one here, this component, this page here, I'm going to take it as a component. I'm going to call it SSO1, right? So this is going to be our SSO. I want to share with everybody else, all right? I could come in here and drop it as a new component inside of risk, and people will just drag and drop this component into their own threat model, which makes it easier for them to actually start a threat model. I could have also make that as a template so people can just reuse it. And we have a lot of mechanisms that we have to reuse stuff and to make sure that people are getting faster into building that threat model. Questions?
Yeah,
so I'm going to go back and read some of the questions. So yeah, no problem. I can see them here. Yeah. So the first one. Yes, we can run on-prem. So we have two implementation possibility, and we provide Docker images.
The first question was, are you running a SaaS version? So just to clarify that.
Yeah, so the one that I'm running is actually the SaaS version. Okay.
Just explain to people what the difference is.
Yes.
People aren't aware.
Okay, sorry, good idea. So in fact, yes, we do have a SaaS and an on-prem version. So on SaaS, well, we use AWS as a hosting platform. We manage everything for you. You just consume the threat model.
And how do they get into the tool?
They just get in via the web page, like I'm doing here right now.
So you don't have to install any.
You don't have to install anything at all. You just go to the link, log in, and just use it. For people that want to use on-prem, well, we'll just provide you with the installations, which are just Docker images, which makes it very easy to deploy. And I think in about 10 minutes, you actually deploy the software and it actually runs. The difference is that you manage everything yourself. So all the patching, all the security around the on-prem solution, you have to manage it yourself. Okay.
Did you see the other question about?
I'm trying to go down, but it's
Can you
just
show-
go.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. You mentioned using a text file to model risk and erase risk transfer from them. Are you their special keyword? Okay. And in the text file, yes. So for this questions around adding erase risk into a text file, we have created something called the OTM. So it's the open threat model that we hope that a lot of people will actually adopt. And what you can do with that specification, you can describe erase risk into a text file. All these components that you see here can actually be described. So it's all documented in our web page here. And actually, I will show you an example on how to describe to erase risk in a text file.
Do you want to kill that chat box?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Pick up the wrong one, pick up the wrong one. So start left. Yeah. Oh, so they change it now. So we have an example of the OTM here. And typically what you need to do is to just describe it within a text file or within your ID, and then you can upload it to erase risk, and erase risk will actually do that. So probably we'll send you guys some links so you can have a look at it. And I think
Can you show an example? What one looks like?
I think they modified it. So they just modified the page. Yep. Yeah, so typically it can look like that. As you can see it here, you can describe, for example, the project. You can describe what it's going to be looking like. And here's, I think it's got even more details onto what it's going to be looking like. Okay, the components and so on. So we have a very detailed page where we explain all of that. And we have some examples to be shared. And this is, for example, this will be drawing a very simple threat model, and it will provide that. So from the text file, you'll be able to get this kind of threat model. And then obviously we'll be able to generate all the risk and the countermeasure behind this application. And this is actually the basis that we use for our CloudFormation import and our Terraform import as well. So we used Terraforms. Are the threats derived from a model like MITRE? So yes, we use MITRE as well. So we use CAPEC, we use ASVS. So we have different sources that we use for the threat modeling and for the content of erase risk, as you've seen in the product. The next question will be, in the SaaS version, can you ensure that data remains in the UK or in the UE? In the EU. Yes, so we use AWS. So typically what you can do, you can choose the region that you want to have the platform deployed, and the data will actually stay there. So again, every customer gets their own instance. You don't actually share the instance with anybody else, and you choose the region that you want to be in. So you keep the data within the UK or in Europe, wherever you want to have it. Okay. Any other questions? Good. Any question in the room, guys? Okay.
So, sorry, I had one. You said you referred to the different compliance standards. I mean, David was asking about like CIS. Would it be possible at some point to show how that comes into effect on the tool? So you've got your model.
Yep.
Just to sort of show, just to bring it to life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you show your model here, you go to your countermeasures, and for example, every countermeasures are mapped to a specific standard, right? So if you want to create your own, you can create that standard and then you can map it. And so typically what you do here, you can do the filtering around any of those compliance. And in fact, within the tool, so I'm going to use PCI DSS because this is the one that I've used here. And typically this is what you see, right? You'll see, hey, what I've got implemented. So I already start implementing something, and then I will see the kind of thing that are required for me to do, and then also the thing that are not compliant and the thing that actually failed, right? So this is how you filter, and this is how you can organize yourself to have like a kind of a roadmap of the things you still need to do in terms of, for example, in PCI in this one. Yes.
Can you drop things in that are mitigations to see an effect?
No. So if you want to work with mitigation, typically what you need to do is to work on those mitigation here. And then you can document whatever you did, or what is actually processed here. And you can even test those, right? So somebody said I fixed it. Well, you can run some manual tests. I talked about the the Fortify integration that we have, but in fact, you could also have some manual tests to say, hey, let's go ahead and check if you have any cross-site scripting here. And these are the tests that we
So you
provide.
could actually write a pen test spec.
Absolutely. So we're working with partners right now that want to take our threat model to be able to create some rules for the source code analyzer, for example. And people are saying, well, we can take that image to say, well, these are the kind of things that we need to test within our application as well.
So, Arno, just a thought. We've spoken about things which are already in there, but there are occasions when somebody knows of a threat that isn't necessarily put up. Could you show how you incorporate a manual threat, please?
I mean, absolutely. So if you wanted to incorporate a manual threat, typically there's few ways to do that. Within your threat model, you can go ahead and create new ones, or you can even go to our libraries and import that new threat within that library. But I can do it here. For example, I'm looking at the Lambda function, and I'm seeing some threats, and I'm like, well, you're missing something here, Iris Risk. So let me go ahead and add something. I could add something from our libraries, or I can add something brand new, and then I can reuse it later on. So here I can say, well, this is a manual test. Okay, you get a reference, and obviously you will have the opportunity to link it to the impact and the ease of use, which we'll use later on for the risk calculation of this product. Okay, and then you can describe what it is. On my example, I've also created a custom field, so I can use stride. So we know that a lot of people are big on stride. Well, we don't stop you from still doing stride manually. Here, I've got the opportunity to say, well, this is part of time frame, for example, right? So I can use that as well. So this way I created a manual threat, but I'm not going to stop here. So I can also provide, well, how do you actually fix that threat that I've now provided to you guys, right? So you can actually add a countermeasure to that specific threat that we just created. And so, for example, you can say, well, fix 101, right?
Log4j, actually log4j Java.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you created the countermeasures. Then this will appear in your report, or you can send it to the different team using the ticket and so on. So now we're going back to the loop here and to Iris Risk. This can also, yeah.
Can you link this countermeasure to the different frameworks? That we
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes.
So, it will be
So
supported against.
absolutely, yeah. So very good question. So yeah.
In terms of testing, are you aligned to WASP SVS?
So we use the SVS, WASP SVS for all the threats that we've seen. So anything that is web will be linked to ASVS. And so we do have some testing steps around that as well. Yeah.
Can you just explain what that is for people that don't know?
Yeah, so ASVS is a framework for testing and verifying some of the threats that we've seen in here. So we integrated within Iris Risk, and we use the threats for that framework as well within Iris Risk.
And how does that help people linking to that framework?
Well, it contains a lot of the threats and the countermeasures which are out there in the world. So a lot of people, for example, are taking OWASP Sub 10 as a source of truth. Well, we have more resources that we use within the tool, and OWASP ASVS is one of them. We also use for anything that is cloud. We also use the CIS benchmarking, right? So if you're using AWS, we use CIS benchmarking for AWS, using CS benchmarking for Docker and so on.
Okay. Have you gone further with CIS to use some of their audit functions?
Right now, in terms of the audit, not really, no. So
You should
we'll
consider it. Because you've got a CIS license.
Yeah.
You've got that. It's Java.
well, probably something that we'll look into. Not quite sure right now because we still have a lot of things that we want to build into the tool. We want to make it more flexible so developers can come in and use it very easy, right? So this is really the focus that we have these days, making sure that you can describe it and also improve the experience that people have and automating everything, all the process now.
So just half a second, just to clarify, what happens is that we have a customer success team and we get feedback exactly like you've just come out with that suggestion. And so our customer success team constantly gather all of that information, and then they feed that back into the pipeline of development and so on. So we have this close relationship with existing customers. And one of the reasons why we have the community version out there as well is because we understand that there's a lot of people like yourselves who are going to be constantly thinking of things. And by building that community, ultimately you land up with a much greater level. Now, we've got about 4,000 community users at the moment. And I was told yesterday that there's about 3,000 different threat models that have already been produced and so on. And that is gathering momentum all of the time. So feedback from places like the community, feedback from customers and interactions we have with prospects, all of that gets captured and then prioritized and fed into that development cycle. So that those the monthly releases we have, sometimes it's bug fixes, sometimes it's new features, sometimes it's enhancements to the various aspects of the libraries like those standards. So all of this is incredibly valuable to us so that we can actually continue to make sure that the tool is focused where you need it focused.
So you had a question about attack framework. That's well mapped in CIS.
Yeah.
So what you'll find is it's a universal way of getting there. So if I need a NIST framework or I need a Microsoft best practice, I go into the universal set of policies in CIS. Not only do I get a benchmark of the 27002, how you improve it, I also get the reasons why, which is the 27001 style of you'll do this because.
Yeah.
And that's very powerful. It's a triangle between the audit tool, the benchmark, be it as an AWS secure image, and then on top of that, you've got the layering capabilities and good explanations in depth that kept up to date. Might be worth considering having a permanent mapping to it.
No, thank you. So for the benefit of who couldn't hear, we were just given a recommendation to look at a couple of the standards and how those may relate. And I personally don't know whether that's in there or not, but just so that everyone on the background could understand what was. Yeah. No.
I mean, we try to keep it up to date. And like Julian said, we try to listen to our customers as well. So if you look at cloud formation, for example, this is a typical example of somebody saying, well, you know, we need to do that. And we actually went in and implemented it. So this is the kind of things we're listening to what our customers are saying, and we're trying to implement it within Everest Risk as well. If you look at one of our libraries, the IEC 66443, probably doesn't make sense to any of you, but it's something that is very niche to the industrial world, industrial automation. A lot of customers have been asking for it. We actually build it into the tool as well.
David Cuthbertson, who sits on one of their panels, came here and presented his graphical view. So yours is 100% mapping of that fully implemented.
Absolutely.
So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. High praise.
So we're mapping that, and you know, we're always looking at adding more stuff. So we actually have a guy and a specific team for medical devices, for example. This is something that an area that we want to work very hard on because we've seen a lot of customers actually needing this.
So Cyber Essentials does that as well. They have specific domain areas.
Okay.
And I think that's quite a small subset. It's only about 90 sets. So it might be worth you doing that one because that's common enough. Yeah,
and we're seeing a lot of traction. So IoT medical devices. So we actually have a team just for that, just to build and have more component around that area of things. Okay. You can also link this to your CI/CD pipeline. So for example, you could say, well, I'm building my application, but I want to check within Everest Risk if there is a threat model for this application. And if there is one, well, let me know how many top 10, for example, threats have they been marked as implemented. If not, I will block the build, for example. So these are the kind of things. Yes, it's a little bit extreme, but you could do that.
So on your tooling,
yes.
If I wanted to do a new desktop build and I had a dozen components, could you do one of those nice and simply on it? Yeah. I might try that tomorrow.
We just asked about an example of a threat model and that could be used on the community version. So yes, of course, that could be done. I think you were referring to a desktop, but
if I built a desktop just as an exercise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's exactly what you could do with community at no charge. It's on there. Just sign up and you can use it.
Put a few tools in and see what you think.
You absolutely can.
So one comment on you just mentioned, you can link into CI/CD pipeline and stop it.
Yes.
Yes.
Which is not a good idea, by the way, but I just wanted to.
In our case, every single application goes through CI/CD pipeline, goes through code analysis and vulnerability testing, and it is blocked immediately.
Okay.
There's no exception to this rule.
Okay, good. So some people use that, some people hate it. So again, the decision is yours. If you want to block it, you can do it. So
it's
I'm
a
just
very high level decision, way beyond the.
Yeah, way beyond the talk today. Absolutely.
It's
so
absolutely no.
We were just having a debate about the pros and cons of the CI/CD pipeline and whether you should block it or not, and that was the debate. So if anybody couldn't quite hear what was going on.
So I've got another question. So You showed two-way connection to Jira. If developer marks Jira ticket as closed, the threat will also be updated as mitigated.
Yes.
You have a way to tie threats to tests. I think it would be interesting to show which test tools you can consume directly and mark threats as results.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
So
yeah,
the
that's-
question was, apart from the fact that there's a bi-directional with Jira or things like that, are there test tools and other things which are integrated into Iris Risk or potentially can be?
So the idea, for example, if I take the S3 bucket, which has some very interesting tool, in fact, test. One of the tests is that, well, how do you actually make sure that my data is backed up whenever I use an S3 bucket? So we have, well, how do you actually do that? So how do you enable backup? By enabling versioning. But also we have some type of test that goes here, for that test, if you want to test it, use that. But also we can integrate other source of testing if you want it, right? So we have a list of tests here. They can reuse it from Iris Risk, and you can actually use those tests. So I mentioned earlier, Microsoft Micro Focus Fortify source code analyzer. Well, there's other sources that you can use. Scripts, you can use OWASP Zap, for example, if you're doing a dynamic test, and you can actually leverage those ones to verify that in fact this threat has been mitigated or not, if somebody says so. So here, I got the test, I can then mark it as passed, and so on. If it was failed, it will also reopen the ticket, and a lot of scenarios within that.
So there's an API, right?
Yes, so you can also use the API to automate or to do things outside of Iris Risk. So if you want to extend the capability of Iris Risk, well, you can use the API. So I mentioned earlier the CloudFormation import. We had a customer even way before we knew about using CloudFormation. They were already doing that by using the API and then just using SAMgrep to grab some information and put it into Iris Risk. So the API is the way to import or to do things that we don't actually do right now within the tool.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand a little bit about the test when you were selecting the various testing tools or approaches.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Does it mean that Iris Risk will actually invoke those tests tools, or is it just kind of documenting which tool has been used?
Okay, so the question is around the testing and the tools that are here. And the question is, are we actually invoking those tests? In fact, we don't invoke them. So what you need to do is to upload those tests to us, and then we'll verify that with the testing that you sent. So for example, for this example here, you can say, I'm going to use a script which will check for this. And if the script is successful, it will send it back to Iris Risk using the API. So you can make an API call to say, well, I verified it and it works, or I verified it, it doesn't work, and I will fail the test or I will pass it. So you have to do it from the external tool, okay, using the API.
So
Any
you
other
don't-
questions?
You
Yeah.
don't invoke the test, but you will be able to consume results of the tests on continuous basis.
Absolutely. So exactly that. So we consume the result of the test from other sources, like the Fortify source code results. We'll consume that and we'll see what they are. What we can also do, we can also export all of our results to probably a centralized management center. So for example, ThreatFix. So if you use ThreatFix, which is a tool which allows you to take different scanners, and then you can correlate those results. Well, we can also send our result to ThreatFix, which will correlate. Sorry, that's my French kicking in right now. Correlate all these results, and it will actually give you a better idea of what you're actually doing.
Okay, so I had a question around using the testing tools, Arnaud. So you said you can send the results back by an API.
Yep.
So I presume you mean that's something else calling the Iris Risk API to tell Iris Risk this is the result of the test. What's the most typically what is that other thing that's coming back and talking to Iris Risk? Is that the CI/CD pipeline tool or the testing tool, or what is it?
Well, it depends on what you're actually doing. So if you're doing testing, well, the testing tool will call back to Iris Risk and send the results. If you're using CI/CD pipeline, well, the CI/CD pipeline will actually communicate back to Iris Risk and to query Iris Risk and to get those results. So again, it depends.
It could be either.
It could be either, actually, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so it could be either. Can you name some names in terms of tools that typically already maybe do this stuff?
Well, as you can see here, the list of the tool that will validate all of these threats on the screen. So for example, you could use OWASP Zap, you could use Cucumber Test, you could use the Micro Focus, JUnit Test,
Yeah, but how many of those tools can actually call your API?
All of them.
They can.
These are-
Any
these
tool
are
can.
native. These are already in it.
Yeah, they're already in it, but any tool can communicate using the API anyway.
Fine.
Right? So if you write it, if you have a specific tool internally, we don't support it. Well, you can use the API to actually integrate that within Iris Risk and extend Iris Risk and add more text to Iris Risk or more text if you wanted it. Okay.
So if something is running inside Jenkins pipeline,
Mhm.
how is it simpler, easier to configure, or?
Absolutely. So we do have some example even on that. How to communicate from Iris Risk from Jenkins to Iris Risk. You run your test and you can query Iris Risk and say, hey, let me know if there is like a very critical vulnerabilities. Has it been marked as implemented? If not, I'll stop the build. So that's the example I gave you earlier. So that's from Jenkins or for any integration tool really. So we have a script for that as well.
I'm assuming that for different threats, you can have different tests.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have things for web applications. We do have things for example, anything that is in the cloud. And there was some very nice thing that we seen the other day, which was an external software, which is called Kix, which allows you to do some testing around policies in AWS. Well, in fact, we can actually reuse that within Iris Risk. And we were looking at how to actually implement that out of the box. But these are the kind of things we can do within the test and using the Iris Risk tool and the automation behind it.
When you're saying these tests, do you mean vulnerability testing, actual testing?
Not necessarily vulnerability, but for example, in this case here, I can test that the S3 buckets versioning has been enabled. So it's not really security, but I just want to test that this security requirement is being actually implemented. This is what I mean by test.
So take that one. Say I suddenly change my vendor from AWS to Google.
Yep.
How do I remap it?
Well, if you change, so the question was, if I change my supplier from AWS to Google, you know, how do I change it? Well, in fact, typically what you need to do is to come back to the architecture and redraw your new architecture. Or probably you move into the new architecture, even before you're doing this, let's go ahead and try to remap my application into Google and then see the different component in Google. And here we'll provide you with all the security requirement for Google, even before you actually start deploying that Google environment.
That's unfair, but if it was just the bucket and the database.
Yeah. So
Sorry, can you explain why you need to redo that impact assessment?
yeah, because now your components are completely different. So you probably need to give information back again to Iris Risk. So in fact, we don't even know what it is, right? So at your design stage, you're going to say, well, these are the new components of my application. That's what it's going to be looking like. Well, here I've got the chance to now draw that new architecture, and then I will have that. So to give you an example, actually, I've got an example of a cloud migration project with a real customer, almost real customer here. So typically they started with having their application on-prem, and then they design what they were going to build into AWS, right? So this is the on-prem, this is the AWS. So even before the whole infrastructure is deployed, they actually know the security risk and the different security requirements that they need to have in place before they actually move into that platform. So that's, you know, a lot of customers actually using that to know where they're going in terms of, you know, their cloud platform being built.
For that scenario. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Yeah, when I see here, you are using, let's call it classes rather than instances of the assets themselves.
Mhm.
So how does the tool address the availability threats?
So we're more, the question was, how do we handle availability threats? So the tool will really focus on security and anything that is also related to security. So you will have those security requirements. So if you have things like availability, which will touch on availability, we do have some specific requirement for those. But again, it will depend on the case by case. So I'm not pretty sure which one that is, but we do have some security requirement for that as well that will protect availability of your applications.
You had to deny the service on free.
Yeah, for example.
Yeah. The other
Last
thing to
project.
bear in mind is that the tool also gives you compliances. So for instance, you might have all of your security pinned down, but take the banking world with anti-money laundering regulations or KYC, etc. Those form part of the library. And so you don't only have a threat in terms of material risk of a hacker, for example, but you also have a threat of making sure that you're not falling foul of the regulator, so that you can ensure that you can demonstrate that these standards have been followed in the way that you're treating the data and that kind of stuff. So there's the flexibility is that you can apply these things as well. So if you have a unique situation, you have certain conditions within your industry. There's nothing stopping you from actually building those into a library and then mapping that in, so it will govern the behavior of your developers and the operations team as well.
And when you are doing the threat customization, which is mapped to an asset, does that mean that this asset with the new threat will be available for the rest of the organization to use, or is it just for that particular asset?
So the question was, if I modify an asset, would that be useful for everybody else in the company? So if it depends where you modify it. So in my threat model, when I just modify that, that will be just for that threat model. But if I wanted, I could actually customize the iris risk component to the new threats, and this will be used for everybody else. Okay. So there's a question also about pricing, which I don't think I'm going to jump into, but in fact, the pricing is per threat model. So the number of line that you have here will be the number of license that you will need to use iris risk. Pricing will be another discussion altogether. Any other questions? Are we doing for time? I think
We're doing well. I wanted to sum up in a minute, but was there something more you wanted to show on that?
I mean, I'm almost done. Well, I'm done actually with demonstrating the tool. There's more to it, but in fact, today I think it's a good high level view of the tool and what it does and how it can help you to work with the different teams. So we have things allowing you to work with different teams. So for example, the security guys can provide some templates. They can have the developer starting to do the diagrams, and then we have things like we call the workflow states. Which can have. Let me just bring this down. Which can act as security gates. So here, developer comes in, draws the diagram, you send it to the next level, and then the security team can come and review that threat model that is created. So if you're not an expert, you can get actually help from the expert afterward as well within the tool.
So Arno, you've just mentioned something. What you've implied is that there's a community of people contributing to a threat model. So how do people collaborate?
Okay, so they're collaborating because they can log into the tool. We have those workflow scenarios. And in fact, whenever they log into the tool, those guys will have different roles and permissions. So I can define those roles and permissions. So let me just go quickly in there. So we have some roles out of the box, which can determine what you can do within the tool. Can you see the customization here? Can you just draw a diagram? So anything here is really granular. I can disable or enable anything at all. And what I can also do, I can segregate what people can see or cannot see. So you could have some projects which are more secure, and I don't want everybody to be able to see it. So I can show and create a business units and assign those business units so they don't actually see inside of those projects as well. Okay. And so typically, a lot of people can work on the same project. They can create a threat model together. They can collaborate. So sometimes we have people sitting in a room and doing some kind of dashboard on the board, on the blackboard. Here, you can do that from iris risk. You can, well, we're now working all remotely, right? So I can work with my teammates within the draw.io and start drawing the diagrams and making sure that we're answering the questionnaire together and then generating the threat model. So we can collaborate this way. And I can get also help from the security team as well if I wanted to.
One other question, if you see it, about risk scoring.
Okay, risk scoring is a very interesting one. We have a risk scoring algorithm behind iris risk. So it takes into consideration the trust zones. It takes into consideration the threats that we have, which has different risk scoring. So for example, you've seen when I was creating a new threat that I could describe the impacts to my application plus the likelihood, right? So this is one of the formula that we take. We take the trust zone, we take the assets that you're using within the tool, and this will allow you to generate a risk scoring. That risk scoring can be seen here. And in fact, it can be customized. Let me remove that here. And in fact, it can be customized to fit your need internally as well. Yes, there's a question in the room.
Taking that a bit further, if I may.
Yeah.
Current federal thinking is to show what's going on in the wild to replace the traditional CVSS first score. So have you considered looking at the active threats list as published by CISO?
I would imagine so. I think the question is, have we considered looking for the active threat
Like,
list
don't
published?
so much use the CVSS score,
Mhm.
and I think we're going to see a shift. I mean, it's never going to change towards what's active out there in the world. So you might get a permanently updated map of vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
and then as it comes out each month, this is the wild stuff going on now.
So I would imagine that the answer is absolutely, because we've got 5 people just dedicated to researching exactly that kind of thing, those sorts of data points, and so on. So I would expect they would be, but I'll make a note and
I'll
just check.
take that offline. with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can I maybe sum up what I think?
sure,
Yes.
go ahead.
Let me-
You want to sit down here?
Oh, no, you stay there. Okay.
That's the other.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is, thank you very much. I'm going to attempt to summarize what I think you've covered, and maybe then we can check that I've got the understanding right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we've heard today is that irrespective of whether you're going to use a tool like Iris Risk or whatever, you need to be thinking about threat modeling for your applications. Okay, tools can help, and we've seen how powerful tools like this can be. But I just wanted to summarize the process and then try and link in how the tools can help along the way. But for me, the process is the most important part. Yeah. And so what I think you've told us is, first of all, you need to understand the application that you're doing the threat modeling for. You need to understand the trust domains, the different aspects of the application, what's on the outside, what's on the inside, what does the application consist of? And you used an example where you had an application made up from AWS components. And the benefit of the tool was you had some pre-built widgets that you could drag in, and you could say, right, this is a standard component from AWS or what have you. Okay, and then that makes it easy when you're drawing that. But clearly, there are many other tools that you can use for drawing things, and I'm going to refer to Draw.io. So Draw.io is just a drawing tool. It doesn't do threat modeling, but it lets you draw a picture of the application, and that's a good thing because you want to share that picture with people to validate the application to start with, just to check the business functionality. But then the threat modeling process, as I understand you describing it, is then to say, okay, well, having understood the application, the trust zones, the architecture, what we now need to do is we now need to identify and understand potential risks. So once we've got the different blobs of the application out there, we can see we've got a web server, we've got a database. If we know even what the technology is, we can be very specific. We can say, okay, we know that's a Microsoft web server or that's an Oracle database. We can go and say, these are specific risks that you might have for that. And the reason we need to do that is because we now need to say, okay, we haven't built the thing yet, we're just designing it. How are we going to design this so that we make sure we don't end up being vulnerable to those risks when we implement it? So we have to know if, for example, a particular technology has a certain weakness, how do we avoid that when we implement a thing in the first place? So that's all part of good design. And then the tool, if you have a tool like this, that can help you, can open your eyes as to what some of those risks might be. And then I think the next thing that you then told us about was, okay, you can use that. If you have a tool, it can help you describe those as security requirements, because typically what we'll do is, if this group here is very much sitting on the intersection between security people and development folk. Yeah, so the purpose of this group is to try and help bring those two parties together. So what we're saying is, if this method is very much around taking this approach and this philosophy and saying, okay, we've got the developers, you've got their application, they know what the business function is. Before we go and build it, let's make sure we include security requirements into those. So we've got some non-functional requirements for security. Tooling like this can help us understand what those non-functional requirements are. Yeah, and we can put that into the requirements spec. And if we've got tools like Jira, we can integrate with that. If we, tools like that. So that's great. So that helps us be productive. And that, and then if you've got requirements, you've now got potential tests. So with those tests, we can now give that off to the testing team. Yeah. So this is all helping it flow through the development life cycle. And then my understanding as to what you said was at the back end, when the thing has been built, we can now help integrate. So if we've got some tooling, some testing technology, we can then say, okay, well, the testing guys, they should have built some tests using some of the tooling like JUnit or what have you. Is it actually closing the gap? Is it actually doing that? And can we tick those things off? So then we can integrate that back with the project manager and say, yeah, okay, those were the functional requirements. These were the non-functional security requirements. Yeah, it's been done. We've got this evidence, or it hasn't been done, and so forth. And the whole purpose, I mean, Julian at the beginning talked about, you called us, you had a slightly different term rather than shift left. You talked about starting left. It's the same principle. What we're trying to do, from what I understand what you're saying is we want to make sure that people, rather than scan the source code after it's been built and find out that we've got a load of security vulnerabilities in it, we make sure we've thought about those security issues before we build it so that we don't find out too late. Because by the time we built the thing, it's very painful to come and remediate those security issues because we'll have people wanting to make the system go live. They won't want to wait for those security issues to be fixed, as we know. So this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to help people get it right from the beginning. Okay, so have I got it right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to make sure my understanding was correct, okay? And this tool is one, and we're really grateful for Julian and Arno to come along and explain how this stuff works. But I just wanted to be clear that the philosophy is the most important thing, you know, around threat modeling, fitting in with the development life cycle, helping people do things, getting it right sooner rather than later. Okay, so sorry for that little ramble. So what I'd like to do then is if there's anyone online who's got any further questions, we're very welcome to, you can ask them on the chat. If you wanted to come and ask a question on your speaker, let me know and I can unmute you, but you'll have to let me know that you want to do that. So we've got one other question that's just come in. You want to just have a look at this, Arno?
It's not really a question.
No, I think it's just a statement. Okay, so let me read it out. So it says the point of further investigating on the technology which is used to perform the security analysis is to be able to see the weakness of that technology and make sure that we are being really guided without relying blindly on the technology. Okay.
So it's prevention is better than cure.
Yeah, and I think that's the message, isn't it? Really, is prevention is rather than sort of let's fix it when we find we've got a problem. Let's try and avoid the problem by building it right the first time round. Okay. No one's coming up saying they want to chat online or any further. Anyone else in the room want to raise any points? Okay, so look, thank you everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Arno, and thank you, Julian. Okay.
Thanks very much.